our recording. So for those of you who are joining us later on, so glad that you would watch this recording. We're always grateful for the opportunity to connect with our TPM National Learning Network, and we've got a really great program in store for you all today. Just a couple of housekeeping notes that we will mention on the front end if we can switch to the next slide. As we said, this is being recorded, so we'll make sure to get that out to folks by the end of the week on our Slack, and please feel free at any point over the course of the program to ask questions or unmute yourself by raising your hand if in the case that you want to make comments. This is a more intimate group. We did some very targeted outreach to our partners that we know are interested in healthcare for recruitment of participation. So we anticipated a smaller, more intimate crowd, but hopefully that will really allow us to get into some rich discussion on the latter end of our time together today. So if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide, just to briefly tell you what we plan to cover. I have just a couple of announcements on the front end in terms of things that we've been up to at the Chamber Foundation. The majority of our program is really about these stars that we have with us today, Marianne Sheahan and Betsy Hassan and Eric Bing. So thanks to our partners for their willingness to join us and to contribute to today's conversation. We'll have some presentations from them, as well as some brief facilitation questions that I have prepared for them, but then really want to get into the Q&A from the network and hear what you all are interested in knowing. We all recognize that healthcare is an industry that had many talent challenges even pre-pandemic, and then add to it all of the pressure that the system and the industry has experienced in these past couple of years. So we know that the work is difficult and there are a lot of challenges before us, but we always like to think that those challenges as opportunities in TPM of how is it that we can really create a better system for our talent and then for communities as well. In terms of just kind of some closing remarks, we usually like to have a bit of an open share with the network. So in the case that you have anything that you want to be able to communicate to the network more broadly, just know that we'll present that opportunity on the very back end as well. So just a couple of highlights for me by way of new resources on the next slide is that we did have an opportunity to release 2 new case studies highlighting the great work of our partners, and in particular, the case studies that we were able to connect our network to in this past month or so is about opportunity populations and how the TPM framework has been leveraged in order to connect populations and talent that don't typically have the same experiences and opportunities when it comes to accessing education and training and employment. So we have highlighted DTE Energy and their workforce readiness workshops, as well as Consumers Energy continuous improvement processes to say, hey, TPM has worked really, really well for us, but we're not getting the diversified talent. We really want to go back and think about how it is that we might be more intentional in attracting people of color and women in particular. David DeLong, who many of you have had exposure to in the past, who's written a number of case studies for us. He and I co-wrote a report capturing some of those key learning lessons from these case studies, as well as 2 others that we've written on opportunity populations. So interested to get your thoughts and see if it's helpful for you all in thinking about how it connects to your work, but always love the chance to share those new resources with you all. On the next slide, you've probably seen a lot from us by way of communication on our TPM National Learning Network Summit. We have been so excited planning this summit. There's a lot of great stuff in store. It's probably the most jam-packed event that we've ever put on, in the sense that you all are doing so much incredible work that we're just trying to fit in all of those ways to highlight it and to bring attention to it. So we'll be coming together on September 27th for the first in-person summit in the past 2.5 years. We're so pleased to get to welcome you back to our offices in DC. So registration is now open. Laura, if you wouldn't mind popping in the chat the link to the registration page. One of the options is for you to attend our reception that will be weather pending on the chamber rooftop, which I have to say, we have the very best view of Washington, DC that there is to offer. So hope that you will join us for that reception to connect with your peers and really tee things off in a successful way for the full day of programming on the 27th. If you're wondering how it is that you might be able to access that $200 travel stipend, please fill out the TPM National Learning Network survey. Laura will include that link in the chat as well. And if she's not able to, then I'll be sure to once Marianne and Betsy have a chance to start presenting. But why should you attend? I can think of no better experience and opportunity, and Marianne and others can speak to this based off of their firsthand experiences. No better time to connect with your peers and really dedicate time to thinking about how you're going to leverage the framework, enhance your own implementation, no matter where you are in your TPM journey. It's a great way to learn from others and to walk away with some very specific strategies of how it is that you might go home and really improve your talent practices and strategies. So we're very hopeful that you'll have an opportunity to join us. And if you have any questions about the summit, please let us know. One thing that I do want to mention, because it will be coming your way shortly, is we are doing things a little bit different by way of some of the workshops that we're hosting. We're actually going to have an RFP process in terms of folks that want to present about their TPM experiences. So we'll have 3 specific topics that folks could speak to, and we'll provide some more detail and summary in an RFP proposal that we'll get out to you guys later this week via the Slack, as well as our other social media channels. So all of that great stuff, but please plan to come see us in September. We're really excited and pleased to see that so many of you have registered already, but we do still have a couple of stipends left in the case that you want to get in those surveys and be considered for those travel stipends. On the next slide, if we can go ahead and start to transition into the real stars of the show, as I said, is we've got 3 phenomenal speakers in terms of the great wealth of knowledge that they're going to share with you all. I think that their presentations are going to be very valuable to the network as a whole. So Marianne and Betsy and Eric, thank you so much for your time today. Marianne and Betsy are going to get things started off, and then I'll have just a quick follow-up question for the 2 of them before we transition to Eric's presentation. Similarly, I'll have a specific question for him, and then we'll open it up to more of a group discussion and then lead into audience Q&A. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Marianne and to Betsy. Thank you both so much for being here today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks a lot. It's great to see everyone. Thanks for being here. I went through the Talent Pipeline program in 2017. Yeah, that was a really long time ago. My first collaborative was in construction, but my second one was in nursing and healthcare. And we've come such a long way since then in 2018. I'd love to share my journey with you. I'll tell you a little bit about where we've been, where we are now, and where we intend to go in the future. So I'll just let you know that I work pretty closely with the University of Vermont Medical Center. My colleague Betsy is here with me. We're gonna just go through a little bit. I'll tell you the history, but she'll tell you what we're working on now. And then if you have questions at the end, we'd be happy to take some of those. So the healthcare collaborative that we organized in Vermont, we started in 2018, and we had about 35 members who participated at that time. Everybody was really in kind of a tough place at that time, looking for people to work in healthcare. And when we did our first round of critical job, which jobs are in demand, nursing came right to the top. So in 2021, last year, in the summer, we did another needs assessment. And at that time, we had 65 employers throughout our state who participated, including all 17 hospitals, 8 VNAs, and just a small percentage of long-term care facilities. But the situation had grown really dire. With the pandemic, we saw a real strain on hospitals, which trickled down to the at-home care and also to the nursing homes, so the long-term care facilities. So nobody was immune to it. In fact, in 2021, we calculated that we had about $125 million worth of travelers in nursing alone. So that was pretty significant information. When we did our needs assessment last year, we asked people to forecast what they thought their hiring needs were going to be for nursing in the nursing career pathway. And that included a number of roles, including the LNAs and the RNs, which were our biggest need. We had a need for about 6,200 nurses statewide over the next 2 years. 2,600 of those, or more than 40%, were RNs. About 50% of those were in hospitals. And then we had about 1,500 LNAs that were forecast as well. So it's pretty interesting stuff. We also found out that we had about 70% of our forecast was for replacement jobs. So over a 2-year time frame, we were looking at a 70% turnover in jobs. So that was pretty significant. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So we use this as sort of a diagram that describes the talent pipeline. And I'm going to just say it's a lot of information to take in. The most important thing I want you to see is in the purple, there's a box here that shows nursing assistant. And that was one of our most critical jobs. And to get that licensure for a nurse assistant, it's a 172-hour course. But you can see that the average pay for Vermont is about $16.63. Now, this is 2021 wages. It's probably 20% more now, because it's such a demand. But with just 1 year of education, you can move to this practical nurse license, and the average wage there is $26 an hour. All right. And then another year to get your associate's degree, registered nurse. And the average pay there is $36 an hour. So you can see how important that is to develop this pathway. One of the things I like to point out on this chart is our biggest barrier to expanding that pipeline really has to do with our education systems. Our education systems turn away approximately 50% of their qualified applicants because they don't have enough faculty to teach. So if you look here in the green box on the far right bottom, clinical nurse educator is one of the most important roles that we could have. You can see that it pays about $37 an hour. You have to have a master's or a doctorate. We've now changed the rule in Vermont to say you can have a BSN and be overseen by a master's or a doctorate, but only with a special waiver. If you look at the registered nurse, the scope of practice for an associate's degree or bachelor's degree is exactly the same. Average pay, $36 an hour. Clinical nurse, master's or doctorate, $37 an hour. So that's a big part of our problem. So there's just a few of the things that are important to point out here, but I'm going to let Betsy go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about why the program that we've put together is successful.
Thanks, Marianne. So hi, everyone. It's really great to be here with you today and to share our work. Marianne and I have known each other for quite some time now and really enjoy doing this work together. So traditionally, I've worked in a number of organizations where we've supported licensed nursing assistants or other people who are non-nurses to find their nursing degree. But really what was in place was really a lack of a formal program, and there wasn't a lot of structure around it. So we would say, sure, we'll pay for your tuition if you work here, for 5 years afterwards. But really, we all know that those sort of tuition agreements where you've already put the money up front and you've paid really lack any sort of ability to recoup those funds should they default on that or go and seek employment elsewhere. And so that's a little bit where we took a different slant with this program as well, is just sort of having that experience and knowledge. Another thing, as Marianne mentioned, is really that clinical instruction piece. So as you saw on that chart, a registered nurse who's fresh out of school makes just about as much as their clinical faculty or even some of their tenured faculty that are in place for them. And so that's a really big barrier to having nurses that gain experience at the bedside, even seek a master's degree in nursing education to come back into those clinical faculty positions. So what's unique about my role at the hospital is that I supervise all of the clinical educators here, and within my centralized team, we house a nurse assistant training program that has a clinical function as well. And so what we did is we modeled clinical instruction support for our nursing apprenticeship pipeline, similarly to our nurse assistant training program. So someone that is on the University of Medical Center's books as a nurse educator will actually provide that clinical instruction. So there's no barrier at the academic side to ensure that these students have placement, that they have appropriate faculty. And so that's one of the key things that we did that's a little bit different. We also recognize in knowing that our LNAs or our CNAs that are working with us, we know what supports they need just from their work-life balance, from the struggles that they face just from being an employee with us. We know them really well. Oftentimes it comes in the form of, childcare funding or, transportation. And so those things can make going to nursing school very difficult because the nursing school is also really hard. And so what we did was we developed a number of wraparound services at each stage of their progression throughout this program to ensure that they had a better chance at being successful. And I'll talk in more detail about what those are in another slide. And then sustainable financing using loan repayment. So again, what's different about our financing model is we're not putting all that money up front as we've done previously, but instead we're working with the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation to develop these students taking out loans within their own names. So as they progress through the programming, they're taking out loans to cover the cost. And then as they're successful, we're paying down those loans. So one, it also helps to build things like their credit. Oftentimes, these people have attempted to go to school before, have maybe defaulted on some payment, have been unsuccessful. And this has really given them a second chance, which has also been really wonderful to sort of be a part of, helping these people be successful in another step in their career. Go to the next slide. So here's a list of what our wraparound services really look like by service. So you'll see that we have the University of Vermont Health Network, and that's really the University of Vermont Medical Center that's participating right now. And we also have a clinical nurse mentor. So this is one of my nurse educators that's going to follow this cohort of 9 through their whole program. She's going to be there as the liaison between the schools, between the VSAC Corporation. She's going to help be that one point person for them. Should they need to reach out to someone, should something not be going well, she can attend any of their progression meetings for schools. She's really available to whatever they need. And she's also a link within the own organization. Are they having issues with absences, or what other things can she help connect our employees to, just even within internal resources? Academic support. So this again is that clinical faculty that we're supplying to help lessen that faculty burden on the academic partner, but they're also an expert in the areas that they're having to teach these students through. They're working in the clinical environment already. And then retention services. So these are really focused on what else can we do and put in place to help these 9 employees, students be successful, and whatever they need to sort of understand that we want them and we want to build loyalty with them throughout their program. We have working bridges, which is, and Marian can help fill in on this because she's a little bit more familiar with it. But then this is again another nonprofit organization that we partner with as an employer that really helps build those wraparound supports that are more external to the organization. And so again, they can help with resource coordination. They can help with transportation issues, just help troubleshoot things and be another support for the student and employee. Then we partner with Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. This, I think, is a really important partnership in how we support them. They each get a financial counselor as they go through this process of securing the loan, understanding what that really means, how it's going to be impactful for them if they choose to leave the program, and that sorts of things. It also helps them with all of the application processes. and also access to grants and scholarships. There's a lot of funding right now that's available through the Vermont State Legislature, but the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation is really the experts in this and ensuring that the students get the money that that's available to them. And then we have our Vermont Community and Technical Colleges. So there are 2 schools that we're partnering with for this program. After the students either go through their nurse assistant and training program, because you can come in without being an LNA, we have a support and able to do that. We have them take their prerequisite courses through the Vermont Community Colleges. So there's one counselor there as well that attaches to all of these students that helps ensure they meet their deadlines, follows them through the progression. If someone is slipping within their grades or they may need more resources, tutoring, there is this dedicated counselor as well. And then they also have a dedicated counselor as they transition into their licensed practical nursing program and then eventually their registered nurse program. The other great thing is that all of these people meet together and we talk about the students and we understand at what point that they're going to be in and who may need more support in one area versus another. So there's a lot of effort and coordination that go into this, but what's great to see is also that everyone's really excited to participate in supporting these groups of students and employees because we recognize that we're doing something really great that can hopefully be replicated in other places. Anything to add on those, Marianne?
No, I think if you're not familiar with Working Bridges, it's actually a national program by the United Way. So we happen to have it here in our state. It's been very successful, but other states actually have programs very similar.
Great. The next slide. So this is just a picture of sort of what the employment, education, and loan repayment over the years really looks like for the students and employees. So you'll see that as they enter the program, they either gain their LNA in our LNA and training program, or they've come in as an LNA already. Throughout their employment of year 1 and year 2, they're working as that LNA role. In year 1, they're completing their health sciences courses. And then they've also taken out that first loan for their health sciences courses. There is an assessment piece here that is actually part of our employment process. So they have to meet the necessary minimum scores on their AccuPlacers, which are just math and science, and math and reading, I'm sorry, and comprehension. So they need to meet the minimum there. That's really just to understand who's really going to be successful in progression of this program all the way through their nursing program. In year 2, this is when they begin their LPN or their licensed practical nursing program and coursework. So again, we start paying on that loan for their health sciences course because they've now passed those all successfully, but now they've taken out their loan for their LPN year. Transitioning into year 3, they're working actually now as a licensed practical nurse. We've adjusted a number of our staffing models mostly on our general medicine units to incorporate the LPN role so that they can again have that bump in pay and we can utilize them to the fullest scope of their practice. In their education, they are in that registered nurse ADN year. And so now they're starting to take out that payment or their loan for their RN year, but we're repaying as they're being successful throughout. I'll also mention that another perk of this program is when they're in academic session, they're paid for full-time employment, but we're actually allowing them to work at a minimum of a 0.5 or 40 hours in a pay period of 2 weeks, 20 hours per week. And so, you know, we're also putting supports in place so they can be successful and investing, you know, that's money to the organization. We're investing those funds to ensure that their success. And then as you can see in the loan repayment schedule, they work after that year 3, they start working as an RN and they're with us for a 3-year commitment after that.
So one of the nice things about this program is that it's planned advancement. And when, you know, each of these people who are in the program have recently been hired into these roles. And the woman who did the offers for them told me that everyone she contacted cried when she offered them the job. She said they either cried because they could see themselves moving out of poverty, and they thought this was the opportunity for them to do so, or they cried because they didn't get it. And so we thought about this in a lot of different ways. We said, for the people who didn't get it, because we could only offer it to, Betsy was using the number 9, but we actually offered it to 10 people. Yeah. So for the people who didn't get it, what can we do to bring them along too? How can we ensure that they get what they need? So we looked at the people who were offered the position and we said, okay, all of them were already LNAs. Maybe this is a recruiting tool for the LNA. If you're an LNA, you could be more successful at getting into this program. I mean, obviously, if it is successful, we'd like to scale it next year. And just, keep a constant rotation. But this is the work that we're intending to do and roll out throughout our state. So the network itself has 3 major hospitals in Vermont, a couple in Northern New York as well.
Yeah, and I think I'll just comment. So we really did minimal marketing just because we thought that there would be a lot of internal interest. And, eventually we'd like this to get to a program that we're bringing externals into as a true pipeline. So I think 4 of our candidates are actually external to the organization and 6 are internal, which is great to see that internal progression and support. But all of the people that weren't selected for the program, we are meeting with individually to say, this is one pathway to become a nurse. Here are the other supports that we can ensure that you have access to funding, that we can work with your management team for better scheduling options. There are other programs that the hospital is thinking about building to support people like that aren't eligible maybe for this type of pipeline, but they may need a little bit of help in another way. And so we're really meeting with all of them, ensuring that they become an RN if they want to be, and that we're listening to their feedback and what else we can do to support this group, because it's such a vital start to the pipeline.
What an amazing story. I know that there is still a lot to be seen in terms of there's always learning lessons that we have the first time we can get through a process, but there's a lot of really incredible content here. To make sure that we do get to a really rich discussion, I'm gonna hold on my follow-up question, and we're gonna transition to Eric, and then I'll ask them as we get into our transition discussion. But thank you, Marianne and Betsy. That was some really incredible learning lessons so far in your journey, and excited to see what's to come. So with that, we're actually going to switch our permissions, and Eric, if you want to start to share your screen, you should be able to. We will go ahead and introduce Eric Bing, who is the Chancellor and CEO of CHCP. And I've had the great pleasure of meeting with Eric a couple of times over the past couple of years. And it seemed like the time was right to have an opportunity for him to present some of the College of Healthcare Professions and their great work with employer partners. So with that, Eric, I turn the reins to you.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Jamie and Marianne and Betsy. I just love that program. To actually have a stackable program from nursing assistant straight through is just so powerful, and it's what the country needs. So the College of Healthcare Professions, I'll click kind of through quickly here so we can have time for that rich discussion, is, it's really interesting. When you look at TPM, we're kind of the poster child for it, because we were founded in the Texas Medical Center as an internal training school for the McGregor Medical Association, which was one of the largest physician networks going back to the 1950s in Texas. And the whole reason around it is there wasn't a talent pipeline of allied health professionals back in the day. Still problems, obviously, with it. And so that's how we really we came about in what we are doing. We are now the largest provider of allied health graduates across the full state of Texas. And the other thing I think that's very unique from us is because of our background, our rich heritage, is we really have always thought of ourselves, even though we're a college, of having two customers, the student and the employer in what we're doing. So we have 9 campuses across Texas, and Andrew, it's good to hear you from the Gulf Coast over there earlier, as we have 3 in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, 2 in San Antonio, 1 in McAllen. And then we also have a large online presence because of all of our programs are really blended. The first year of for 2021, during COVID, we did not shut down because our programs were already flipped classroom. Only 2 days a week in class or online with boot camps, because the vast majority of our students are adult learners. 85% of our just little less than 6,000 students are of color. 53% are Hispanic. And also because we have done this flexible but very structured, stackable programs. You know, if you're a limited medical radiology tech, you can bulk transfer from your cert to a associate's radiology tech, then you can get a bachelor's, or then you could do CT, MRI, or mammo going horizontal. Medical assistants can go in health and medical administrative services, get a bachelor's. There's coding and billing. All of them are stackable programs. But in doing that wraparound, it really works well for the adult learner with a complicated life. Rice University just did a study on us. And they were looking at our Hispanic population, which again is 53%. You know, Texas is a very large Hispanic and growing population. We are graduating 78% of our students and placing 80% of them. And kind of the national and state average is more in the around 33% in what is happening. So it is very possible when you build education and take education and build it around somebody who's living day to day. It's an extraordinary way to pull them out of poverty. And you can see we graduated 3,300 students during the first year of COVID and placed them with 2,100 different employers. It was incredibly complicated. And Betsy, especially because, you know, the hospital side of all the clinicals and everything. So overall, we've in the last 5 years placed with over 5,000 employers. And this past year is 2,100. And it's also all the large players in Texas. But the other is it's all these small community clinics, which is really the lifeblood of our communities and are so critical. And they were extraordinarily critical during COVID in providing care. So let's take a look here. I thought I would do kind of 3 case studies to give you some ideas of the types of collaborations we do. And because it's really all about employer collaboratives, how does it all work, and analyzing where there's a shortage in the market, like we just heard about, and then putting a solution in place. Again, we are always working because the employers, our customer, is understanding what are their problems and how we can solve them, because we're really an extension of their HR teams. And quite frankly, because we're all clinical, they're clinical teams. As anybody who's in healthcare knows, HR and clinical work very closely together, and all the hiring and designing of everything that happens for who they want in their systems. So the Ascension system, one of the largest in the country, was in desperate need of surge techs. To give you an idea how crazy it is in Texas right now, you can get contract surge tech work making $11,000 a week. And you didn't hear something wrong. That's like $45,000 a month doing contract work. They're so short. Now, this was right before COVID hit, but they were not having luck with the other colleges in the system. They came to us. We jointly recreated and built a surge tech program that had some specific things. Ascension's the largest network in Central Texas, and you know that's where Austin is, and the area is just exploding in growth. Now, one of the things they really want to do is upskill their folks, which is another part, really important part when you look at TPM. And so we were able to jointly, there was a securing of dollars from one is the workforce agencies, but also JP Morgan Chase, in order to help scholarship and build through this. They also were looking for us to do specifics, because one of the problems is the other systems that were doing surge tech at the time, and we weren't, were rotating all of the students throughout the whole different networks, and they were losing them and not getting jobs. So what we did is we built a program where their specific students area would not rotate to other hospital systems, which gave them the opportunity to offer jobs. To date, right now, they've hired 17. There's about another 20 that are tracking for them. There's overall 80 in the program. Central Texas is very short. And so what you're seeing here is that opportunity for internal career advancement and also lowering turnover in what's happening. And also you're increasing the quality of healthcare. So another one is the University of Texas Medical Branch. They have a urgent care system throughout the area. And this is part of the big state system. This is kind of the Gulf Coast area where Andrew is. And but their problem is they couldn't find radiology techs. Now we do radiology techs and limited radiology techs. And the other is it wasn't cost effective to have a radiology tech in an urgent care. But then people were having to wait for hours and hours for a contract RT or somebody roving to show up. And also it was extremely inefficient from an expense standpoint. So what we did is we got together with them. They really could not have their employees coming into our campuses. So we actually took our didactic curriculums and built a program specific to them where the students could do all of their didactic online, but then we did a train the trainer model for all the positioning and everything that has to happen so they could stay within the UT system to do all their positioning hands-on and clinical. But then we also made sure that they were able to pass their test, because there is a certification for this that you need to have in order to be able to do positioning and do x-rays. Extremely satisfied employees, high pass rates in what we're doing. All of these students, or the vast majority in all of these programs, are of color, adding diversity in. UTMB saved a ton of money on travelers and contract, lowered turnover, and probably most important is the waiting time for a patient with a broken arm went down to practically nothing. The HCA system, we're all familiar with HCA, has a huge amount of hospitals throughout Texas. This is just a Central Texas program, and quite frankly, they're in the process of taking this not only in Texas, but larger, but they're really, really short on certified medical assistants chronically. And so what we did with them is they were losing them all because they were going into other externships with other employers. So we worked with them to create a whole externship program where we would really define and personality-wise align our students, and we jointly kind of do some recruiting around it, with the units that were missing people, but also making sure that they aligned well from the type of person they were. They also changed from taking weeks to open up an externship to literally hiring putting somebody in externship the next day when we had them available. It's been very, very successful. They're hiring 95% of the externs. It's a attempt to hire without the cost to it other than the employee time it's taking. They've hired 31 MAs in the last year, increased throughput of patients, which their physician networks were getting slowed down dramatically, decreased temp costs and lowered turnover with a lot higher quality in what's happening. So when you really look at it, is our colleges are really kind of built to be a TPM solution for healthcare human capital, and it ties in. And you know, we appreciate Jamie you giving us the time today.
Thanks so much, Eric. There was a lot of great stuff in there. Certainly teed up some questions that I have for you all. So thank you again for your willingness to share that with the group. We'll go ahead and we will switch to gallery view so that we can all see one another. So if you want to stop sharing the screen, we can see everybody's beautiful faces. And as Nikki said in the chat, please start populating your questions in the chat. We'll certainly want to hear from you all. I know that one had come from Corey Melton from Tallahassee for the Vermont team, and she just asked how many applicants had they received for their 10 slots, and Marion responded that there were 40 applicants. So I have a question, just kind of a starter question for each of you in terms of like a key learning lesson from the work that you've done in order to create these more very comprehensive, I feel like, talent pipelines. What would you say is a key takeaway or learning lesson that if you were to do this work again, it's kind of your guiding star, your kind of first point of, okay, this is something that I acknowledge and need to build on?
Happy to share my initial thoughts just from the employer side. One, I think really understanding the time that it takes and the resources that are needed to get something like our program up and running. And I also think ensuring that you have the right group of stakeholders involved in the conversation. I think, because there are so many parts to this program and different organizations working together, we really needed to develop a collaborative stakeholder group that were experts in what they do and understood all of the sort of, fine details that a student may have to go through or that an employee may have to go through in order to be successful. So I think it's, partnerships and collaboration and time and resources.
I think that's absolutely right. Go ahead, Eric.
I would, one thing I would say is one of the big goals of these is to upskill your current employee base, in which Betsy is doing such a great job on. And I think one of the big things is really set expectations. And as you tying into what Betsy was saying about having everybody at the table, because you think about it, if you're upskilling people, it's because most likely they're great employees. And that means they're a great employee in a unit that they're working in right now. But the manager of that unit's not necessarily going to be aligned for upskilling because they're worried about quality, throughput, all it doesn't. So you really have to educate on the front end about the importance of it, how it's going to work, so that everybody is aligned in, because you don't always have all the WIFMs aligned.
Absolutely. And that's something that we talk about a lot in TPM in terms of trying to showcase that value proposition, that potential ROI on the front end, and then actually deliver on it, right? Then measure those outcomes and demonstrate the success so that you keep employers and all the necessary partners engaged at the table. Marianne, anything that you would add to that?
I always like to start with the data that we've collected, because I really feel like it's the data that tells the story. When we're talking about where the gaps are, we were identifying that only about 15% of LNAs went on to get their nursing license, but most of them have aspirations for that. It's just, there's no easy connect for them. So if you make a program like that, you better believe that is your audience. So why would you create it and not offer it to them? It's just kind of like connecting the obvious.
I'll just comment on Eric's mention of sort of including those operational leaders in the buy-in. I think for this program especially, in that we're paying them study time. And so that's going to, right, those are going to be impacted on those unit level budgets and those sorts of things. But one of the tactics that we've done to sort of address this is hold a number of info sessions and update sessions. And that clinical liaison person is also someone that's available to the leaders, so they understand expectations as the student progresses through the program. And that LPN year is actually the most challenging and when they're probably going to be most limited to work, and they'll be able to work a little bit more when they're in their ADN year. And so having a resource too that's a point person for the leadership team is also really important.
I think you all spoke to that coordination aspect so beautifully in that slide that showcased all of the different touch points, but then to have those specific points of contact for these learners so that they are truly feeling that comprehensive support was just really, really nicely showcased in your slide. So thank you all for sharing that. A question that's coming through the chat is from Corey from Tallahassee, and it's, Marianne, did you survey employees about their desire to upskill? That's a great point that most of them want to.
Yeah, we definitely did. We asked every question that you could possibly imagine in our survey that would lead to these kind of results. So I actually gave a copy of our survey results to Jamie, and she can just distribute that if anyone's interested. It's actually on our website at www.vermonttpm.org. But the report, it has a data set on it, but it also has a narrative that goes with that was developed by the very folks who we're serving. So yeah, we asked that question: would you be willing to train people to become clinical faculty? Would you be willing to run an apprenticeship to bring people who are LNAs and LPNs up to the RN level? We have really great data on that stuff too.
And I love that you make that point, and you all know this, in TPM, we talk about the importance of data constantly, but that narrative component to the data is so important as well, and that we need to verify and validate and really understand what the data is telling us, so that as we take action on the data, we're really using it in an intentional way that's going to help propel, real solutions and real strategies that work for employers, that work for students and workers, as well as our education and training partners. I'm going to continue to monitor the chat, so please continue to keep the questions coming. But a couple more that I have just in thinking about, and for CHCP, Eric, I recognize that you all started from this place of industry involvement and industry led, but I'm curious if you all are able to kind of highlight for us the examples that you shared and how they're different from previous kind of education business partnerships. And for the Vermont team, there's a lot of other partners that are involved in this as well in terms of those comprehensive support. So wondering if you can highlight for us like what those key difference makers are. Eric, do you want to start?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was for the Vermont team.
Oh, Phil, well, in the case, do you have anything you would like to input?
So I would say, first of all, I think every employer has a different culture. They have a different way of going at looking at things. What is going to work with Ascension is not necessarily going to work with HCA, as we were talking about. There's some fundamental pieces on it. And obviously right now, everybody's looking at efficiency and how can you make it shorter and how measuring outcomes and all of these pieces. But I think it's really important that you step back and do a deep dive with the employers when you're really trying to build a talent pipeline to understand their culture and what's going to work and not work. And clinical units can have very different feelings about how what's their responsibility, what they should be doing. I mean, we have, here's a really interesting one is we have some great employer partners, but they don't want to do any clinicals at all. We also have some great employer partners who love to offer the preceptorships, the clinicals, because they see it as extra help and tying in. And so it's kind of like, it's kind of like somebody carrying your child and then you for them. And so there's all sorts of different ways to approach it that you can end up with really great outcomes. But I think you just cannot do a broad brush stroke. It doesn't work.
Marianne or Betsy, anything that you all would add or provide your perspective on? What are some of those difference makers? You highlighted it really nicely, I thought, in your slide in which you talked about kind of the clinical instruction and the comprehensive wraparound supports, but anything else that you guys would want to add?
I think, a little bit to each culture. So does each nursing school have its own culture? And, we've really focused this pipeline on our technical college. But I think that there are other opportunities probably with our four-year organizations. How can we start to think comprehensively about the ways in which you become a nurse and what supports are needed in each of those places? And then I think organizations just have to start thinking a little bit differently about this and how they allocate resources, how they, I really believe it's a professional obligation to offer preceptorship and mentorship of trainees and things like that, but also recognize that people need to be compensated for that time and that training. So I think there's a lot that organizations can do as well to make these programs a little bit smoother and, to aid in their functioning and buy-in.
Do you feel like that is somewhat rare? As you said, you see it as a professional obligation, but it sounds like it requires some advocacy and
Yeah, I mean, I
pushing
think
people.
it sort of aligns with the state of nursing right now. They're incredibly burned out. They're tired. They are working side by side with, traveler or contract nurses who are making sometimes 2 or 3 times more than them. And so that adds friction within the environment. And then, precepting and clinical training is really a ton of work. It takes a lot of skill. And, I think it's not sort of across the board that everyone is compensated for that. Some hospitals do a really great job with it in offering, differentials or bonuses that have to do with it. I've even worked in places where if I precepted a new nurse, I would get, 3 credits to the university I was getting my master's in. So there's lots of creative ways that we can compensate people providing this training, but we need to think outside the box a little bit.
And a little bit can go a long ways too, in just showing.
Yeah, we talk about the scope of practice for an associate's degree nurse, and that's one thing that our technical college provides. But most of these hospitals before COVID had sort of drawn a line in the sand and said you have to have a bachelor's degree. And then that went away during COVID. Everyone's like, yep, you don't need that anymore. You can just come to work for us. But there still is, like, if you were to carry the lines of loan repayment out a little further, you could build in a bachelor's degree, but we're just trying to get to the RN right now. Those are things that, are mostly the imperative. To get to the bachelor's degree is a goal. Yes.
Karen, I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about your role as the host organization and what you saw as kind of the most critical tasks or activities that felt to you as that kind of convener. And in particular, like, what were the employers like Betsy looking for from you in terms of your coordination of this effort?
Sure. Well, I'll just say, Betsy worked for a different hospital before this, and I was working with the University of Vermont Health Network for 4 years on this project, and it went pretty much nowhere because we couldn't get the attention of the people who were responsible for it. It was, everyone was just pulled in so many directions. When she came on, it was very clear. She was focused. The scope of this was exactly what she needed. And it just started to go. And how long have you been there, Betsy?
Probably 8 months, 10 months, maybe.
Yeah. So it's all happened in really that much time. And when I say I've been working there with them for years, yes. But there was no central person who took full responsibility for it. It was a lot of, and in these small rural hospitals, which is like where Betsy came from, it was a regional hospital. There was more responsibility. So I feel like where some people probably say, oh, you went to the hospital in Burlington, they get all the attention. It's like, well, they need the most help. Like, the smaller hospitals are able to make things happen in a much more nimble way. And I just say it's a lot of it is the people who I'm working with. So one of the things that I think I provided was the coordination of pulling the partners together. So I've worked with Vermont Tech very closely, and they're fabulous partners. And so is Community College of Vermont. They're in a transition right now where the Vermont State colleges are all becoming part of one called Vermont State University. And that's going to happen in the next year. So we stepped into this at a time when things are kind of in turmoil for them, but they've been very focused in saying they had an apprenticeship program at another hospital, but they didn't have any of the things that Betsy described, the loan repayment. They didn't have the wraparound services. They didn't have all that stuff on top of it. So there were probably some lessons learned, but we knew when we did this one that it was going to be what we needed. And the college itself said in testimony in the legislature, there's nothing better than what this is. And so the legislature listened to that and said, let's do more of that.
Thank you for that. And Mary, would you like to unmute yourself so that you can ask your question?
I'm expecting that just because it was so competitive to get through as an applicant, that those who had a felony conviction would not make it through the process. But I'm wondering, are there formal regulations around this? And if so, at what point was the background check put in place?
Sure. So that was all part of our hiring process, and we do have a standard background check. And I was actually going to comment on the other really key partner in this that really needed a clinical partner like me was our human resources director. They really managed the hiring process, sort of those behind the scenes details of how we, do the panel interviews, get everybody arranged and together. But all of that goes through our hiring process. If they were already employed, we would have already, if they were candidates that were selected and already employed, we would already have that information on file. But anyone that was new to the organization went through that full background check processes and everything else that we do, licensure verification and things like that.
Yeah, we do too. We do it in the college before they start, because we don't want them to go through a program when then they can't get licensed. That would be a terrible waste of time.
Thank you for sharing that. Given that we're getting close to closing out on time, would love to give you all the opportunity, starting with Eric, in terms of a last word, just key takeaway or message that you want to be sure to get to share with the NLN.
I think the key takeaway and messages is, first of all, I think TPM really works when you think about stackable programs and growing. It's all there. And I think the big thing is to make sure that you are listening deeply and creating programs that work for an adult learner who has a complicated life and juggling kids and jobs and maybe in poverty and all the other things. But at the same time, you're building the programs that are going to work successfully within the hospital and healthcare systems that you're working for, their culture, how they're built, how they will come together, because you really need both sides for it to do volume.
True pipeline effort. Absolutely. Betsy, how about from you?
I think it's really understanding the impact that a program like this can have. And I think that that's something it was really a selling point to our senior leadership team. Yes, there was the ROI and understanding that we're addressing the nursing workforce shortage. But really, this is one of the ways in which we're doing it. And this is a way that we're doing it in building up our own employees through a pipeline. And I also just think that, the experience that I've had in building this program really is a testament to the resources that are within our community that really want us to be successful and to have people have career progression and access and all sorts of things. So I just think that collaboration and teamwork is something that's so special and important.
Takes a village, but employers like you are so critical. Thank you. Mary Ann.
Last word. I think that for the people who are involved in healthcare with talent pipeline, it looks like there's a long road ahead, but I think the value of being part of this national learning network is to learn from each other. And I'm still learning too. I mean, Betsy and I are, we're every day communicating about new things that, come up for this. I think, the value of this network is really being able to reach out to each other, ask questions, and really learn from each other. So I welcome you to use any of the materials that we've provided. Ask more questions, use each other as resources. It's pretty important.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all three of you. Round of applause for our speakers today. Lots of learning lessons, lots of great nuggets of information in there. So we will share the recording. We will share the slides, thanks to our colleagues, but you're getting high fives and applauses and celebratory horns and confetti all around. If anyone does have any network shares, we are at time, but in the case that anybody would like to share anything with the network, we would welcome